Welcome to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Visit us online at taoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Now, The Modern Taoist.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Modern Taoist. My name is Kit Man, and I hope that you are living right in the center, right in the flow, being who you were meant to be without forcing anything. A lot of comments from our last few episodes, and you guys have been so kind, and I appreciate that. You have no idea. When we talk about things internally here, the number one thing that comes up is all the great comments. So please feel free to keep those going. Make sure and like and subscribe and do all the things that you have to do, you know, when you want to support a podcast, because we're trying to just get the Tao out there in a modern way. And I know there's a lot of input. One of the things that come up often is how much input is going into people's brains. And I think our biggest question over the last 3 or 4 weeks, for sure, has been, Kit, you keep talking about clarity and finding clarity and getting clarity, but exactly what is clarity? And other than, breathing, what am I supposed to do? And part of the problem is that very question. What am I supposed to do? Because there's so much input coming at you right now. And it's not all just information. Most of it is opinion or analysis or reaction or commentary about how you should think and how you should live and how you should build and love and vote and how you should parent and eat, how you should work out, how you should invest, how you should evolve. You wake up, and before your feet even hit the floor, you've already absorbed someone else's emotional state. You scroll for 5 minutes and you've consumed 10 perspectives on relationships, 5 on money, 3 on masculinity or femininity, a handful of clips telling you you're falling behind and doing it wrong. And that's before you even get out of bed. And then you go to work and you text and you listen to something in the car. And even if it's this podcast, it's still more input. Then you check the headlines again, and then you do your job and you get through the day as best you can. And then you unwind at night. And what do you do when you unwind at night? You take in even more. And at no point during the day is your mind actually quiet. And we've normalized this, because we call it being informed or self-development or being engaged, doing the work. You ever heard that one? I'm just doing the work, just doing the work. But what we rarely ask is, this level of constant stimulation, what is it doing to our clarity? I've noticed something in conversations over the last few years. Nothing catastrophic, nothing overly dramatic, just consistent. People are thoughtful. People have done the research. They've listened to the experts. They've journaled. They've talked it all out. And yet they still have questions. They're still very unclear. They can articulate every angle of their situation. They can argue both sides convincingly. They can list pros and cons. They can explain the psychology behind their patterns, and yet there's still some version of, I don't know what to do. I get a lot of emails, questions, commentaries, people saying, hey, here's my current situation, and I just don't know what to do. And that's interesting, because it suggests the issue isn't ignorance. It's not that people don't have the information. It's that they have too much. We've gone from depth to saturation. The ground in our minds and in our soul is saturated. We're at flash flood stage. We can't handle any more information. And so what happens? You start to feel restless. Saturation makes you scan for even more, one more perspective, one more take, one more angle that'll finally make everything click. And when your mind is constantly scanning, it never lands. And when it never lands, even simple decisions begin to feel heavy. You start to question everything. You question yourself way more than you used to. You hesitate. You rehearse conversations in your head. You imagine consequences that are likely never coming. You seek reassurance. And it's not because you're weak. It's you're mentally overloaded. And it's impossible for you to be clear on what you're doing. We live in a time where stimulation is constant and silence is rare. And without silence, clarity has nowhere to form. So before we talk about your relationships or your career, your ambition, relocation, conflict, I want you to examine something more fundamental. What if confusion is not a sign that your life is uniquely complicated? What if predictable outcomes of living are a state of chronic input? What if we are overstimulated and mistaking that state for being complex? Because of overstimulation, more advice is not going to solve anything. Clarity may not require more thinking. Perhaps I would like for you to consider that clarity requires less. We've confused exposure with understanding. That's the first thing. Right now, you can access more perspective in one afternoon than most people could in the history of their lives. And that feels, at the time, kind of empowering. It feels intelligent. It feels responsible. You can listen to economists and therapists and monks and founders and neuroscientists, relationship coaches, political commentators, fitness experts, spiritual teachers. You see where I'm going with this? And because you've heard it, you've assumed you've integrated it. But exposure is not integration. Hearing 10 intelligent arguments does not produce clarity. It produces fragmentation. Right? Here's what I'm talking about. In the morning, you're listening to someone talk about, radical accountability, okay? Personal responsibility, no excuses, discipline. And by lunch, you've heard someone explain nervous system regulation, trauma response, self-compassion, slow down. Mid-afternoon, somebody else is saying you need to take the leap, bet on yourself, burn those boats. And at night, somebody's saying, whoa, now protect your peace, don't force, let it unfold. And everything you hear sounds reasonable. And every single one of them have some truth. But you're switching framework every hour. Your mind never settles inside one idea long enough to test it, digest it, and discard it if you don't like it. So what happens? You've become mentally fluent, but internally unstable. You can articulate everything you've heard. You can argue for staying, but then you can argue for leaving. You can argue for patience, but then you can argue for urgency. You have all the information, but you're not clear. And that's not because you're incapable of clarity. It's because Coherence requires continuity. The brain does not create stable conclusions when it's constantly shifting. It creates more mental tabs. How many tabs do you have open in your browser? That's what your brain is doing. And open tabs, just like in a computer, consume energy. So when you sit down to make an actual decision about your life, you have all these tabs open and you keep clicking on each individual one to see if that has the answer. Because you're holding 15 partially absorbed philosophies all at the same time. And because of that, you don't just hear your own voice. You hear the productivity expert. You hear the trauma therapist. You hear the spiritual teacher. You hear your parents. You hear your friends. You hear the last podcast you listened to, even if it's me. And that is not depth. That is saturation. And saturation is bad for you, because it tricks you into thinking you're doing the work. It's an illusion. Don't consume more perspectives. Okay? Because if your mind is jumping from lens to lens, clarity never shows up. And if you can't get clear, you're just going to be more and more confused. And you start to distrust yourself, because if you were really thoughtful, you say to yourself, you would know what to do by now. But the issue isn't thoughtfulness or your intelligence or your ability to make a decision. It is fragmentation. And fragmentation is a predictable outcome of chronic perspective switching. So before I give you details on how to get clarity and talk about the Taoist way of doing it, you need to understand that part of the problem is you have too many tabs open. You are not unclear because you are incapable. You might be unclear because you've never allowed your mind to stay in one place long enough to be coherent. I firmly believe that most of my moments of clarity are because I have stayed in a Taoist state for extended periods of time without absorbing other inputs. Let's go underneath the thinking. Not what you're analyzing, not which framework you're using, not which perspective you're weighing, but the state that you are in while you're doing it. Taoism is very clear about something most modern people overlook. Clarity is not a state of mental function. It is a being. It is a state of being in alignment. When your system is agitated, your perception distorts. When the system is settled down, perception clarifies. This is not mystical. This is not spiritual. This is observable scientific fact. As I've said before, my favorite thing about Taoism is that it was conceived and philosophized and written down 3,000 years ago. And science is proving it every single day. If you've ever tried to have a serious conversation while your heart rate is elevated, you already know what I'm talking about, because your words come out wrong. Your interpretations skew to the negative. Neutral statements feel unloaded. Think about this real quick. Have you ever had a severe agitated state? Okay, a migraine headache, an anxiety attack, some pretty heavy periods of depression. And you know when somebody that loves you is just trying to help and they put their hand on you, and you know that initial feeling of don't freaking touch me? Even though you know it's coming from a place of love, and it doesn't last very long, but you have that fleeting moment of please don't touch me. That is because your interpretations are skewing negative because so many things are popping off wrong. And your body feels a threat where there is none. This is imbalance. Taoist texts will describe this imbalance as between movement and stillness. When movement dominates, your mind chases. When stillness dominates, things begin to arrange themselves. Now, let's not be so drastic as a panic attack or a migraine headache. Let's just remember that right now, most people are not panicked. They are not in crisis. But they're subtly bracing for something bad to happen because their minds are oversaturated, so their interpretations are skewing to the negative. Their shoulders are slightly tighter than they should be. Jaw slightly more set. Breath slightly more shallow. Thoughts slightly accelerated. And when you live in that state long enough, it feels normal. But here's what that state does to you. It narrows everything. Perception contracts. You scan for the consequences of something. You search for a reason not to do something. And you try to close that loop quickly because your system interprets open loops as risk. So when you sit down to evaluate whatever is troubling you at the moment, your marriage, your career, your next move, you're not evaluating from openness, you are evaluating from compression. And in Taoist language, this is an excess of internal force. It's too much pushing, too much leaning, too much trying to control the outcome. And the Tao Te Ching warns repeatedly against forcing, not because effort is wrong, but because force disrupts perception. Let's do the Taoy thing and talk about water. When water is stirred, you can't see the bottom. When it settles and clears, your perception becomes, hey, I can see all the way down. Again, not poetry, just physics. Same is true internally. If your system is stirred, every decision is cloudy. If your system is settled, every decision is clear. And this is why adding more analysis does not help. You can think brilliantly while dysregulated and still arrive at distorted conclusions. So what does Taoism say? Return to your center and then choose your direction. Because center is not pacificity. Passivity? Either one. It is balance. It's the point where you're not bracing for impact, not defending against imagined consequences, and not rushing to close uncertainty. When you are clear, your options feel less threatening. Consequences feel less catastrophic. And so if you're on the precipice of a big life decision, should I leave my wife? Should I quit my job? Should I take a new job? Should I move to another city? Should I buy a new car? Whatever it is, we have to acknowledge something very simple. If you are slightly bracing for the consequence, every decision will feel heavier than it is. And that brings us to the real pressure point. Because you are considering making a sometimes permanent decision from a temporary state of mind. So let's slow this down and really look at what happens next. Okay? You're overstimulated. Your system hasn't fully settled in a while, and now you sit down to evaluate something real. A relationship, a relocation, a career pivot, a creative risk. Staying somewhere you've outgrown, leaving something that once defined you. Big, big decisions, right? So here's the shift that happens because you are overstimulated. The decision stops being about the situation and it becomes about you. So instead of asking, is this aligned? You are asking, how will this affect me? Instead of saying, is this the decision I want to make? You are saying, if I walk away, does that make me weak? Instead of saying, is this something I want? You start saying, if I want something different, am I ungrateful for what I already have? You see what happens when you attach identity to the outcome? Proportion disappears because it becomes a bigger question because you've made it about your identity. Taoism often talks about harmony, but harmony isn't just this vague spiritual glow. Harmony is about proportion. Things being in their proper scale. When proportion is lost, suffering increases. A small imbalance feels catastrophic. A temporary situation feels permanent. And that's what overstimulation does when it combines with a slightly elevated nervous system. It inflates all of the quote-unquote consequences. Every choice starts to feel irreversible. Every risk feels like a referendum on your self-worth. Every change feels like a betrayal of a version of yourself that you're trying to hang on to. So of course it feels heavy. Because you're no longer evaluating logistics, you are protecting your identity. You're not deciding whether to move, you're deciding whether you are the kind of person who stays or leaves. You're not questioning if you should take a new job, you're questioning whether you are disciplined enough and loyal enough to stay behind. You are attaching identity. Therefore, you are increasing existential weight. And existential weight makes ordinary decisions feel unbearable. Taoism does not treat identity as something fixed. It treats identity as cyclical, adaptive, responsive. The oak tree bends in the wind not because it has no identity, but because it knows that rigidity will break it. We, however, we don't get it sometimes. We cling to who we have been. We cling to how we think that other people see us. We cling to narratives that we have repeated for years, and then we try to make a decision inside that incredibly rigid, suffocating box that we have built for ourselves. And this is where the subtle plea begins to surface. We have all had the following feeling. I get this question multiple times a week, and it's never posed as a question. It is a statement. Please, I just need someone to tell me what to do. You've felt that before, right? where you're so bound inside your suffocating box of identity that you just wish that somebody would just tell you what to do and you would do it. Because if somebody else chooses, your identity risk softens. If somebody else says this is right, then you're not exposed. It's a shared responsibility then, and therefore the weight feels lighter. That is not weakness. That is a desire in your body to relieve existential pressure. But here's the problem. If I were to tell you what to do, you're going to feel temporary relief, but you will not rebuild proportion. You will never test your own center. You will never discover that the decision itself was not defining you in the way that you feared. Taoism restores proportion by dissolving that particular exaggeration. It reminds you that you are not defined by one choice. The earth is not defined by one season, and neither are you. You are not defined by one role, and you are definitely, if I could slam my fist on the table to make this point, I would do it so loudly. You are definitely not defined by one mistake that you made. Life moves. Roles shift. Attachments to people change. Adjustments to career moves. This is all natural. It is correction. And not only is it allowed, but it is required. When you see that part clearly, that correction is required, decisions shrink back to their real size. They're still significant. They still carry some kind of consequence, but it's no longer an identity verdict. When a decision stops being a referendum on who you are, the fear drops. Urgency softens. The drama lowers. You begin to look at the facts instead of the narrative. You can begin to weigh the impact instead of the defense of your identity. You can choose a direction without believing that direction is permanent. And that, my friends, is proportion. And proportion is clarity in action. So, if overstimulation distorts the scale and elevation inflates the consequences and identity attachment magnifies their weight, the next question is something very practical. How do you restore proportion without escaping responsibility? Not by withdrawing from life, not by pretending nothing matters, but by recalibrating your internal environment. And that's where we're going to go next. How do you restore proportion without escaping your actual life? You don't do it by disappearing or abandoning responsibility or pretending that decisions don't matter. What you do is recalibrate. And this is where we enter my favorite form of Taoism. And I don't know if I invented this, this phrase, because I think I'm the only one that, whenever I say it to another practitioner, they always go, ooh, I like that. Tactical Taoism. Tactical Taoism is simple. You change the conditions before you change the conclusions. Most people attempt to solve major life decisions at full speed. trying to evaluate their marriage between meetings at work, assess a relocation while doom scrolling, question their career while answering texts about their kids. That's too much. That tempo alone distorts the scale. The speed compresses perception. When you rush internally, everything feels urgent. And when everything feels urgent, everything feels consequential. So the first move is not mental, it is rhythmic. Slow down the evaluation. Not forever, but remove the urgency from the process. You don't have to decide today. You don't have to resolve it tonight. You don't have to finalize your identity before you go to bed. Tempo, 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 tempo. Slow down. Breathe. The second move, remove the audience. A surprising amount of weight on decisions comes from imagined audiences. We begin to say, well, what will they think? What will he think? What will she think? How will this look if I do this? What does this say about me to them? That social layer inflates the consequence instantly. Taoism has something called returning to the uncarved block. Before there were roles, before performance, before your reputation, strip the audience away. Evaluate your decision as if no one is watching. If there is no applause for you doing a good job or no criticism for doing a bad job, what would remain? That question alone will restore proportion faster than any analysis. Strip away the audience. It's just you. Third step is to regulate before you reason. Don't try to reach clarity through argument while your body is bracing for consequence. If you have a big decision to make, take a walk. I'm not kidding. But without any input. No podcast, no earbuds, no music, no voice in your ear. Leave your phone at home. Even just a quarter of a mile, a walk around the block. Let your breathing align naturally. Let your shoulders relax. If you can't get out and walk, if it's too noisy or you live in a place where it's not conducive, then sit. Just sit long enough with no input. Long enough for the internal urgency to lose its edge. This is not mystical meditation I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, that long hour after hour Zen sitting. That's not what I'm talking about. Zazen. I'm talking about a mechanical recalibration. Get equal. Find some equilibrium. Get level. Clarity loves level. And the final step in tactical Taoism is to narrow the question. Because a lot of people inflate decisions by framing them in this huge global state. You have a decision to make about a job or a relationship or a relocation or whatever. You have a decision to make. And that in turn ends up being, what am I doing with my life? Whoa. That question guarantees to overwhelm. Instead, ask this. What is the next honest step? Not a 10-year plan, not an identity shift, the next step. Taoism emphasizes responding to the present condition, not trying to anticipate an outcome. Shrink the scale of the question. When you do that, clarity will emerge naturally. Because now you're not solving your very existence. You're simply choosing a direction for your next step. Tactical Taoism is not dramatic. It does not require isolation or extreme withdrawal. It requires tempo control, audience removal, breathing and physical regulation, and narrowing the scope. Change the condition, change the consequence. When you do these things, the exaggeration goes away. The pressure of your identity softens. The urgency of which you feel you need to make a decision will lose its volume. And what remains is less performative and less defensive, and clarity shows up. And then the final question becomes this. When the noise lowers and you take these steps, what does real clarity feel like? And how do you actually get there? Forget about the big picture stuff, right? The big question, the question most people have asked me time and time again is, I don't even know what clarity feels like. What does it mean? Steadiness, that's what it means. Not excited, not dramatic, not triumphant, steady. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop searching for reinforcement from outside sources. You stop running simulations in your head every hour. There's less internal movement. But you don't stumble into that state. As we talk about all the time, Taoism is not something that you spiritually trip into. You train for it. Practically. You want clarity? Here's how you get it. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you. Step number 1, 24-hour rule for big decisions. Period, the end. If a decision feels urgent and is emotionally charged, you do not decide inside that charge. Give it 24 hours. Set an alarm if you have to. 24 hours with no input. No input from anyone. No looking up what the consequences will be. No doing research. No asking the Tao guy. No, none of that. 24 hours with nothing. No advice, no research. Just live with the question quietly. And if your state changes dramatically within those 24 hours, that tells you something important. It means that at the time, yesterday, before the 24 hours started, you were reacting, not seeing. And now you are beginning to experience clarity, because clarity stabilizes, reactivity forces. Okay? Number 2. I call it the one question constraint. Instead of spiraling into a huge global evaluation, write down, get a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and write down one question only. And not some big, huge, goofy question like, what am I doing with my life? Not that. Write down, what is the next honest step available to me right this minute? If you can't answer that clearly, you are still too elevated. So stay there and sit there until that answer becomes simple. What is the one next honest step available to me right now? And I'm not looking for the answer to be, I need to do more research. I'm talking about an actual step that you can take right now. If that answer requires a speech or more research, you are not clear. Okay? So sit there, because the answer is there. Number 3, before finalizing any decision, check your body. Not metaphorically, literally. Is your breath shallow? Are your shoulders and your jaw tight? If they are, don't make a decision. You are still bracing for consequence. Do not finalize anything in a braced state. Walk for 20 minutes without input. Sit without input. Breathe slowly. Loosen your shoulders. Relax your jaw. And then revisit the decision. And if it feels proportionate and steady in that state, you are approaching something closer to clarity. My favorite one is the next step. This is the one I do all the time. Ask yourself one thing. If no one knew about this decision for 6 months, would I still choose it? That removes the audience distortion instantly. If your answer changes, then that tells you the decision is probably socially inflated. Clarity will survive 6 months of silence. If no one else knew I was making this decision for 6 months, would I still choose it? Number 5, I call the repetition principle. You do not wait for clarity on life. You practice clarity on small things. Begin repetition. Small responses. Choose consciously in making minor decisions. And I know this sounds silly, but repetition is such an important part of Taoism that when I say choose constantly on minor decisions, it can be something as simple as, am I going to have a second cup of coffee? That decision affects no one, right? It probably doesn't even affect you that much. It is the process of making that decision consciously. So just say to yourself, do I want a second cup of coffee? Yes, I do. Then go get one. Choose consciously in minor decisions. Make repetition so that when big decisions come up, you're not bracing. Because your nervous system learns through repetition. This is why Taoism is being proved by science over and over. Your nervous system learns through practice. If you only attempt to regulate yourself when your marriage is crumbling, then you're going to struggle. If you practice proportion daily, then big decisions stop feeling quite so catastrophic. Clarity is not a lightning bolt. Clarity is the absence of distortion. So when people ask, how do I know if I have clarity? The answer is more simple than you think. Because when you have clarity, you don't ask if you have clarity. And you get there by removing urgency, narrowing the scope, regulating your body, stripping out the audience, and repeating small processes. And when you do that consistently, decisions stop feeling like cliffs that you're about to fall off of. And they start feeling like direction. So what is clarity? Clarity is you standing alone and knowing which direction to take your very next step. Because when you are there, you are standing in the center. And when you choose a direction from the center, it doesn't need to be defended. It just needs to be walked. Just take that next step. If you take nothing else from this episode, take this. Confusion is not a sign that your life is impossible. It's a sign that your internal environment is crowded. And you don't fix a crowded room by shouting louder inside of it. You begin to clear the space. Not becoming more informed about the decision, not trying to find a perfect philosophy, not outsourcing it to get somebody else to make that decision for you. Clearing your internal space so that you can ask yourself the honest question of what is my next singular small step. It takes restraint in a world that rewards reaction. It takes patience in a culture that rewards speed. It takes discipline to pause when your impulse is to resolve. But when you practice it consistently, something changes. You stop swinging between extremes. You stop searching for someone stronger to hand you the answer. And you start recognizing that clarity is, in fact, not rare. It's just quiet. So here's something simple to do this week. Pick one decision that you've been circling around. Don't solve it tonight. Create better conditions around it. Reduce the input for a day. Slow your tempo. Regulate yourself. And ask for the next honest step, not the final outcome. And then see how things begin to change. And I thank you for coming along with me. If this resonated with you at all, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Please leave a comment if you're on Spotify, or if you are anywhere else, you can drop a note through the website at daoananda.org. That's DAOANDA.org. daoananda.org. Tell me where you notice overstimulation showing up in your life. Tell me what decisions are heavier than they probably need to be. Those conversations matter. If you're getting value from these episodes, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you're listening. It helps us more than you think, and it helps you as well. And if someone in your life feels constantly wired and unclear, let them know. This might help. We'll keep exploring this territory together. And next time, we'll figure out something else to talk about. Protect your center, walk your path, and thank you for listening to The Modern Taoist.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Visit us online at daoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Please like or subscribe on this platform, and thanks again.